glory to Jesus Christ, and welcome to this week's episode of God with Us Live. Every week, we're joined by men and women, monastics, clergy, and laity, exploring exciting and inspiring ways to live our Eastern Catholic faith today. Your host is Father Deacon Nick Medelsky, a husband, father, and deacon of the Ukrainian Catholic Eparchy of St. Nicholas. And now, here's Father Deacon Nick.
Well, hello again, God with Us Live listeners. Father Deacon Nick Medelsky, excited as always to be here with you. Today we're going to talk about a few different topics, kind of two interesting ones, hopefully, for our listeners. First of all, Chaldean Catholics, who are they? If you grew up in certain parts of the country, you might not have even heard the term Chaldean before and might not know what that means. And also social media and how that can impact us, how it can be used as a means of evangelization, and how we also have to be careful with that as well. So very excited to welcome my guest today, Father Simon Esshaki. So welcome to the show, Father.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Father, would you mind kind of telling our listeners a little bit about your background, who you are?
Yes, so I am a first-generation Chaldean American, was born and raised in the Chaldean Catholic Church here in San Diego. And my parents were born in Baghdad, Iraq, and they immigrated here in the late 70s, early 80s. And I was, raised in the Chaldean community here. A lot of the Chaldeans who are, I should say, for those of you that don't know the Chaldeans, like you mentioned, there are a lot of people that don't know what Chaldeans are. So the Chaldean people are some of the ancient original inhabitants of the Mesopotamia region, which is modern-day Iraq, and they spoke Aramaic historically. And now, thank God that most of the Chaldeans are part of the Catholic Church. And we were evangelized in the first century, from the very beginning of the Christian faith, by Thomas the Apostle and two of the disciples who were with him, Ede and Mari. And our liturgy is actually attributed to them, and they were probably part of the 72 disciples of Jesus. And so they evangelized the Mesopotamia region, and St. Thomas was also connected to that as well. Most of the listeners probably know that he started the Syro-Malabar Church in India. That's why the Syro-Malabar Church and the Chaldean Church, as well as the Assyrian Church of the East and the Ancient Church of the East, were actually all one church at some point. It was just called the Church of the East. And so now it's four different branches of what was the same church. Two of them are Catholic, the Syro-Malabar Rite and the Chaldean Catholic Rite. And so now we have a lot of Chaldean Catholics all throughout the world. This is probably the biggest time in our history where our people are spread out so much. We used to be mostly in the Mesopotamia region, but there are a lot of Chaldeans in America now, mostly in Michigan. And San Diego is the second largest population in America. That's where I was born and raised.
Yeah, I grew up in Metro Detroit, so Chaldeans are very
nice.
familiar to me. But
Yeah.
I know a lot of our listeners, it's funny when you mention, Chaldean Catholics. Where's that from? What does that mean?
Right.
So is the liturgy and the rituals, are those kind of similar then to the Syro-Malabar? Is it kind of, have they diverged at a certain point? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. The original liturgy, like the main prayers, are the same, and it's also said in the same language. There's ancient Aramaic. It's popularly called Syriac. So we have the same general structure of our liturgy, and some of the prayers are the same, and that the same goes also for the Assyrian Church also. But like I said, the Syro-Malabar used to be one church with the Chaldean Church. It used to be called the Church of the East. We used to have also churches in China as well. But because of persecution and a lot of challenges that our people faced, we lost a lot of churches, and we lost a lot of people as well. And there are a lot of martyrs. Actually, the Church of the East, one of the other titles for it is the Church of the Martyrs, because throughout our whole history, even in the present day, we have been persecuted, and we've had people, faithful of our church, and also clergy and religious, giving their life for their faith.
So that kind of naturally leads, I guess, into my next question. A lot of people in the United States, when they hear Iraq, right, they think about the Gulf Wars and things like that. So obviously, there's that type of adversity. But could you talk a little bit about the challenges and maybe even opportunities that Chaldean Catholics face, kind of around the world, I guess, in general, but then especially here in the United States?
Right. So from the beginning of the 90s, 1990s, a lot of our people started to immigrate. Actually, that's not when they started. They actually started to come in the beginning of the 1900s to America. Very few people, but they started to come to look for business opportunities and safety as well. And late in the 20th century, there was a lot of persecution there in the region. A lot of our people were killed, and there was not a lot of religious freedom for them, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity for them. And a lot of the people at the time, they foresaw that there might be instability in the region to the point where it would not be safe for them to live there. And so that's one of the reasons why they started to leave. And so families started to follow one another out of Iraq, and they moved to different parts of the world, Europe, Australia, Canada, and many of them came to America. And I'm sure most of the listeners know about the persecution that our people faced with ISIS in recent years. And so a lot more people immigrated around that time. And so now we have a huge community, thousands and thousands, at least 150,000 Chaldeans in Michigan, probably actually over 200,000, and about 50,000, we could say, in San Diego, plus a little bit more for the rest of our eparchy, which now in the United States of America, we have two Chaldean eparchies. One is for the Eastern United States, and it's based in Detroit, Michigan, where they have a bishop there, Bishop Francis. And then the Western United States is another eparchy where the bishop's see is in San Diego, near El Cajon, California. And so that's where I'm at.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
And those are kind of the two major centers then, huh? Michigan and Southern California there of
Right.
Chaldeans
Yeah.
here in the U.S.
Yeah. We also have a lot of people in Arizona as
Hmm.
well. It's probably the third largest population in America. And then they're spread all throughout California, and then there's some in Nevada as well. And there's also some in some of the other parts on the East Coast too,
Hmm.
but
Okay.
mostly Michigan and San Diego.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So now to kind of move from the sort of general picture, I guess, of Chaldean
Yeah.
Catholicism here in the U.S. and onto you specifically, could you tell us about your journey to the priesthood, what that was like, kind of what sparked that interest in you, how you felt the call, and then kind of how the seminary process worked and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah. So my dad is actually a deacon, just like you. And so I was really raised in a good Catholic home. I would learn a lot about the faith. I would pray with my family, and I would serve the church as well as an altar boy. I would go to the catechism classes, to the youth groups, and then eventually I became a youth group leader. And I just had such a strong desire in my heart to spread the faith and to help others, to learn about Jesus and to learn about his love for them. And so I tried my best to do that. And around the time when I was finishing high school, I spoke to one of our priests here. Actually, his name is Father Father Andrew Yonan. He is the first American-born Chaldean priest. So we didn't have, obviously, many younger priests that were born and raised here when I was growing up. And so I met him, and so I kind of had a different idea about what the priesthood was. I saw things that made me relate to him much more than the other priests, God bless them, who lived in Iraq and who served there and who came to America to serve the people here. It was very challenging for them to adapt to the American culture. But because a couple of guys were, courageous enough to take the challenge and to accept the call from God, guys like Father Eddie, they set the example for us young priests. And so when I was in high school, I started to really seriously think about it, even though my dad kind of planted the seed in me when I was a little boy. But when I was in high school, I started to really take it very seriously. Now, the problem was as I'm sure a lot of our Eastern Catholic friends can relate to, the seminary formation was tough because we wanted to be formed according to the Chaldean rite, but there was no Chaldean seminary in or near San Diego. Actually, the only Chaldean seminary in the world was in Iraq. And so the bishop at the time, Bishop Sadhad Jammu, he's the bishop that eventually ordained me. He actually started a seminary. It's called the Seminary of Mar Abba the Great. And so it was starting just when I was finishing up high school. And so that movement really got me to discern the priesthood even more, to really go and experience what the priestly life was like in the limited capacity that I could at the time. And I really loved it, and I really had a great desire building up in my heart to give my life to the Lord. And so actually right when I graduated high school, I ended up joining that seminary, which it was very convenient because it was the Chaldean community, as I'm sure most of our listeners know with their Eastern Rite communities, it's very tight-knit. So a lot of the people live right near the church, and so that's where my house was growing up. And so it was wonderful to have a house, a seminary house that was near our church, the cathedral. And so I would, join the seminary, and so I would go pray at the cathedral and learn about the Chaldean language and the Chaldean liturgy. And so it was a wonderful experience for me to be able to learn and to serve my Chaldean community and be formed according to the Chaldean rite, while we were also going to school at a Catholic university in San Diego, where the seminarians and we received a master's in biblical theology. And so we got the full formation process for the seminary, and then I was ordained a priest in 2015 at the age of 23 years old. Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive. What's kind of you've been ordained a few years now. What's kind of I guess been maybe a surprise since you've been ordained a priest, or something maybe you weren't expecting?
It's a good question. Honestly, I wasn't expecting how much I was going to love being a priest, honestly. I kind of saw it as a duty and as a service that and a sacrifice that I was going to be giving to God. But it is that for sure. But the more and more I live it, and I try my best to serve as faithfully as possible while also relying on the grace of God, the more I do that, the more I actually love doing it, and I really just enjoy my ministry and my priesthood with the community that I serve. So I think that's one thing that I didn't expect. I was glad that it happened, obviously, and I was hoping for that, but I wasn't really thinking that it was going to be this good.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
That's also a
of course.
good thing for young men to hear who might be discerning the priesthood, right?
Right.
That it can be even better than you can imagine, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Well, once again, Father Simon Esshaki is here on the line with me. We're talking about about Chaldean Catholicism, and after the break, after we hear about our Saint of the Week, we're going to hear more about Father Simon's missionary work, I guess you could call it, on social media and in a few different avenues as well. So stay tuned here on God With Us Live.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Scenes with the Saints. Do you know which saint collected so many relics that they renamed a city after his collection? Saint Maruthas grew up on the border between the Roman and Persian empires, a place of constant warfare between the two nations. While Rome had legalized Christianity shortly before Maruthas was born, Persia had not, and the Zoroastrians living in that country martyred many Christians. Saint Maruthas eventually was made the Bishop of Tigernakert, a city on the border between these two nations, and so he heard many tales of the martyrdom. Wanting to help, Maruthas went to the Roman Emperor Acadius. The emperor greatly respected Maruthas and made him an ambassador to the court of the Persian king, Yazdegerd. Saint Maruthas quickly won the favor of the king by curing him of the crippling migraines that none of the Zoroastrian magi could seem to help. In gratitude, King Yazdegerd stopped the persecution of the Christians and offered the man of God anything he could possibly want. Saint Maruthas asked for the relics of the martyrs from the Persian persecutions, so that he could take them back to his cathedral on the border between the two empires. Wanting to be as generous as possible, King Yazdegerd gave so many relics to Saint Maruthas that when he returned to Tigranakert, the people renamed their city to Martyropolis. Eventually, through Saint Maruthas' influence, Christianity was legalized in the Persian Empire. This caused the Zoroastrian magi to fear that their power over the people would soon be gone, and so they devised a plan. They had a man hide under the floor of the fire temple, so the next time the king visited, the man could pretend to be the voice of God. And so it happened. The next time the king came to offer sacrifice in the fire temple, a mysterious voice said to him, "I do not accept you, for you have set Maruthas, the leader of the Galileans, at your side." But the words did not have their intended effect, as Saint Maruthas soon entered the temple, had the floor taken up, and revealed the impostor. Seeing this, King Yazdegerd gave Maruthas permission to build as many churches as he would like in the empire, leading many people to Christ. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scenes with the Saints. Join us again next time when we learn more about the lives of these holy men and women.
And welcome back, God with Us Live listeners. Father Deacon Nick Medelsky, excited as always to be here with you today. We're speaking with Father Simon Esshaki, a Chaldean Catholic priest serving out in Southern California, and in a whole bunch of different places as well, I guess, through kind of the digital medium. People may be familiar with your name from social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok, right? So how did that all kind of come about? Was that something where you sort of intentionally entered those spaces as kind of a missionary endeavor? Is it something that just sort of kind of happened by accident? How did that work?
A good question. Thank you very much. So, the university that I went to, I mentioned it's a Catholic university. It's called John Paul the Great Catholic University in San Diego, and they're very much media oriented. Their slogan is to impact the culture for Christ, and so they had a program there called the New Evangelization, which is about using the modern tools to evangelize and to spread the gospel. And so I did really learn a lot about that when I was in seminary, and I tried my best through Facebook at the time. Anytime I had social media, I knew that I was present on whatever app it was, not only to talk about myself, but to spread the word of God. So I would do that. And then what happened was, around the time of the COVID lockdown, I was having a conversation with my little cousin, who was a young teenage girl at the time. And she was explaining to me how there's this app called TikTok, which I knew about, but I thought it was just for people to dance and be goofy. And she told me that there were a lot of other types of videos on there, and there were also some Christian videos. And she showed me some that were very popular that had some anti-Catholic messages. And so I kind of got a little concerned with that, and I looked into it to see if there was a Catholic presence on the app. This is, 2020, and I really didn't find much of a Catholic presence on the app, and I, barely saw any clergy on the app as well. And so I said, you know what, I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna see what happens, because TikTok is a very different type of app, especially with how the algorithm works. And so I did try it, and basically what I decided to do was to be myself, which is why I have some fun videos, some videos involving food, but also to make the main point of my page to spread the gospel. And so because there was barely any priests at the time that were spreading the gospel on TikTok, my videos just got really, really popular. and and it was at the time of COVID, it was during the COVID lockdown, which I'm sure many of the people can relate, that a lot of people were not going to church at the time. And so we had to find a way to reach those people who were not coming to church. And so I figured to go to where the people are at, which is on their phones, on these apps, and to put the message of the gospel on there so that as they're scrolling, they can see some good messages of the gospel and of the word of God. And so I tried that, and it really took off.
So I'm not, I guess, familiar on the creator side of a lot of these apps, but do you get any kind of feedback from people? Have you gotten contacted by anyone who says, hey, I saw your video and I'd like to learn more about the faith, could you recommend something? Have you gotten any kind of feedback like that, or seen any, you know, anything like that?
Yes, all the time, actually. It's actually, unfortunately, it's, this is a good problem to have, but it's too much, too much for me to handle. In my capacity, I cannot respond to all of the people that reach out to me on social media with questions and seeking information about the faith and about their own personal lives. It's a really beautiful thing to see, and I pray for those people, and I try to respond as much as possible. But it does happen a lot, and I have seen a lot of fruit come from my social media ministry by the grace of God.
So is getting involved in the social media space, whichever app or platform it is it something you'd recommend to clergy in general, or do you think it's something that only maybe specific clergy should enter in, or what kind of is your advice on
Yeah,
that?
that's a good question, and I wouldn't say it's for all clergy. St. Paul talks about the different charisms that God gives to certain people, and maybe some people are better at writing books, or preaching at conferences or something like that, rather than being on social media or just serving their ministry. Me, personally, now I don't post as much. I'm actually barely posting now because of the ministry that I have at my church, which is the main priority for me. At the time of COVID, we weren't doing any youth groups or Bible studies, or a lot of the church ministry on site, and so that's what I was focusing on a lot. But now that I'm a pastor, before I was not the pastor of the church, I was just assistant priest, and then I became the pastor of my church, St. Michael's, here in El Cajon, California. And so my main priority now is to serve my own community as the pastor, and then I try to do the social media evangelization when I have time.
And then, do you feel as an Eastern Catholic priest, as a Chaldean Catholic priest, I'm sure you kind of interact with a lot of different people. Like you said, you were one of the first clergy, period, not
You-
just Eastern
Yeah, yeah.
Church or anything, to be involved in TikTok. Do you feel that as an Eastern Catholic priest, you offer something kind of unique to Roman Catholics, maybe able to present the faith in a way that they might not have heard it before, or something like that?
Yes, yes, definitely. And I find that a lot of people are very interested in learning about the Eastern rites and in learning about our ancient heritage and our traditions, our patrimony, and our dedication to the Lord and His Church. And I see a lot of debates and arguments online about the Catholic Church and about the liturgical stuff, and people ask me, for example, if I do the TLM Mass, and I'm like, our Mass is older than even that Mass,
Right.
Right. So it's just cool to teach people about that and to see them learning about the big cultures that are within the body of Christ.
And then just, I thought another interesting question to ask you again, because you're kind of on the other side of things for a lot of people. But no, parents and a lot of other people are always concerned about social media. People like to have news reports about it and things like that. So just in general, can you offer any advice to parents or even Catholics in general, really, about using social media, things like that?
I'm really glad you asked that actually, because I always like to mention that when I speak about social media. And I kind of want to echo what St. Francis de Sales says in his book, one of my favorite books, and I think a very important book for all Catholics to read, which is Introduction to the Devout Life. He talks about things that are not necessarily sinful, but that could be harmful for us, and or that could be sinful if we abuse them. And he says that first of all, we have to be very careful when we use these things. He obviously doesn't talk about social media, but I would say that social media applies to this. That we have to be very careful, and honestly, I would even go to the point of recommending that you don't use it. I mean, I know that I'm on it, but at least being very careful, and parents being very careful and knowing what is out there, what their children are accessing, and what the harms could be of social media on their children's lives and on themselves as well. We see a lot of families even being destroyed because of social media, because people fall into great sins through it. And so I even, during my time using social media as an evangelization tool, I've had to step away for some time so that I can reflect on myself and on what my calling is from God, and what I'm using it for, because it does get very tempting. There's temptations to vanity, and it's very challenging. And if you use it, and this is what I try to do all the time, I try to be very grounded in my spiritual life and in my prayer, so that I have Jesus as my foundation and I have him guide me. And I also rely on the help of some of the brother priests that I'm very close to. I don't do it on my own. I, really ask them for their help and guidance, so that I, try to get the best out of it for myself and for my ministry.
And I think that's important for a lot of people to hear that, sometimes we like to put priests up on a pedestal and think that you're
Yeah,
you're above a lot of the temptations a lot of us face and
right.
everything. But really, social media in a lot of ways is engineered, right, to helps build our own sense of fame and vanity and
Right,
things like
right.
that. So I think
Yep.
it's helpful for people to hear that it's not just us, well, I guess I'm clergy as well. I'm still not used to
Yeah,
referring to myself that way, but
yeah,
lay people and everything, that it's not just something that affects them, right? It's not it
yeah,
affects
yeah.
everyone. It's a temptation for everyone.
Yes, exactly.
Well, once again, Father Simon, thank you for making time to be on with us today to talk about kind of your ministry out there, as well as on the interwebs in social media and all that fun stuff. Before we go, any final thoughts or any other reflections you'd like to offer our listeners?
Want to say thank you to the listeners for listening and for supporting this great ministry that you're doing, and to try to do their best to receive the grace of Jesus Christ every single day through the Eucharist, through adoration, and through prayer, and through the Bible reading, so that you can be able to spread the word of God in the way that he wants. Go to Jesus, and then he will instruct you and he will guide you on how to be a good disciple.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Father, for joining us today, and thank you for listening to God with Us Live. I'd like to mention it at the end here that we have the Faith Bucks campaign running at godwithusonline.org. If you go to the front page there, there's the link at the top you can click on. Offer several different giving levels. Again, those monthly donations, that steady overtime giving, really helps us to budget here at God with Us Online, and plan a lot of the wonderful things we do, both this podcast as well as the webinars and a lot of the other catechetical resources we're able to offer Eastern Catholics here in the United States. So once again, at godwithusonline.org, and it's right there at the top of the page, the Faith Bucks campaign. And if you're able, if you discern that God's calling you to help support this ministry, that's a beautiful way to do it. And once again, thank you for listening. This is Father Deacon Nick. Happy as always to be able to join you every week to find out more about our beautiful Eastern Catholic churches. God bless.
For this week's episode of God With Us Live. Make sure to tell a friend or two about us and subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to follow God With Us online on Facebook and Instagram for even more great content about the Eastern Catholic churches. And don't forget to check out all the other great Eastern Catholic podcasts at godwithusradio.org, where faith meets life. God With Us Live is a production of God With Us Radio, hosted, produced, and edited by Nick Modelski. Send us a message at info@godwithusradio.org.